This series is all about universes, multiverses, planets, worlds, continents and cities. We're delving not into specific games, but into the minute created for them. We'll be looking at where these settings came from, their major features, and why you should consider them for your own gaming experiences. This episode brings us a science fiction setting of epic space opera and stompy giant robot proportions. We're looking at the Inner Sphere, the primary setting of the BattleTech universe. The game BattleTech was devised by FASA, a one-time traveller licensee, in 1984. The history of that company and the game itself is covered in my video essay on that subject, link in the description. What we don't cover there is the background setting used by the game so much. That setting, the Inner Sphere, was initially set down within a few summary pages in the first BattleTech game rule set, then named Battle Droids. Here we are introduced to it through the words of one Tamar Chandrasekhar, lifted from his work A Time of Troubles, and beginning the tradition within BattleTech sourcebooks of presenting in-setting prose to bookend the more game-oriented material, even going so far in some cases as to represent the sourcebook itself as being an in-setting work, such as accrediting technical readouts as reports compiled by Comstar and other factions. Those initial words were as follows. A dark age has engulfed the human sphere, the result of more than 2 centuries of bitter and endless war. Where once a united Star League ruled, 5 splintered successor states now struggle for dominion, but none can conquer unaided, and none can be trusted as an ally. Thus, campaign succeeds campaign, and battle follows battle, all without lasting victory or defeat. Men die, and worlds are smashed, but the wars go ever on. Along the periphery, thousands of planets have fallen into chaos, savagery, and barbarism. They are ruled by men who are nothing more than thieves and brigands. With each passing decade, we fall further into darkness. Science is forgotten and learning mocked. Once proud universities are either empty or smoking rubble, and things that were child's play for our ancestors are impossible for us. More than 2 centuries have passed since a newly built starship last roamed the sphere. Even instruments of war grow more primitive, though no less deadly. Our huge war machines, the battle droids, can no longer be built, and the successor warlords must strip their wrecked machines to find needed spare parts. We have become nothing more than carrion birds feeding on the wreck of our own civilization. Some say the roots of this nightmare lie far in the past. Some say they lie within the soul of man himself. All very dramatic, but very evocative, and also very gamey. In the Inner Sphere, we have a setting that very much ties into the premise of the game it belongs to, and we can infer quite a few things from Tamar's opening passage before we even get into the detail. We know that there are several factions that like killing each other, always good from a wargame perspective. We know the impetus of the entire setting is towards war, again pretty good for a wargame. We won't need to fill in the timeline with the Successor States Happy Families game to cover any aberrant time of unilateral peace. We know it's a dark age where most technological knowledge has been smashed. Brilliant for mixing the span of warfaring concepts from the medieval to the future speculative. That technology smashing and lost learning means that we can handwave any technology we like. We don't have to explain how anything works, because hardly anyone within the setting itself has a Scooby-Doo clue either. And things are an endless downward spiral of limited exchanges and patchworking with salvage. Great for a war game, as players don't need to paint up and field vast numbers of miniatures before they can even start playing. In fact, the 2 model kits and cardboard stand-ups provided in that first rule set gave everything needed to simulate a battle of normal scale by Inner Sphere standards. The set includes another 6 pages of setting details describing droid warrior families, imagine if that name had stuck, The 5 houses of the successor states, Davian, Kurita, Steiner, Lau and Marek. A handful of mercenary outfits, Hansen's Rough Riders, the Aradani Light Horse, Wolf's Dragoons, including their mysterious origin, the 21st Centauri Lancers, and Linden's Company, and 3 pirate kingdoms from the periphery, Santander 5, Oberon 4, and Butthold. Yeah, I was 14. I giggled too. Despite its obvious setup to serve the game, those 6 pages contained enough detail to capture the imagination and bring that to the board. Wargaming is more fun when you are invested in the playing pieces that you are using. Historical wargames, where you are also a student of the period and, in particular, the faction that you have painstakingly placed on the field in miniature. Fantasy wargaming, where you have created some sort of backstory or have been provided one by a novel that you enjoyed. Science fiction, where the characters from the big screen or novels, or again from your own imagination, are right there for you to move about, bringing destruction to your friends' armies. The few short pages of background in the Battle Droid set were foundational and important in all of those regards. A handful of factions to choose from, the invitation to create your own mercenary faction if you chose to, something to give your game character and meaning beyond the giant robots and the rolling dice. With the name change within the game's second edition to BattleTech, and the change of battle droids to battle mechs, and, thank grief, droid warriors to mech warriors, the setting began to coalesce. Where the original set gave us an outline, subsequent releases, driven by the game's increasing popularity, filled in more and more of the gaps, especially with the release of Mech Warrior in 1986, the role-playing game set within the BattleTech universe. More so than wargames, role-playing games need background substance for them to work properly, and background substance was provided. Source and scenario books began to round out those initial summary details about factions and their forces, and the first of the technical readout series contained a lot of background information on each stompy robot it described. But it was really 1987 that heralded the dawn of the Inner Sphere as a setting proper. If you consider those opening 3 years from 1984 to 1986 as the opening salvos of the sunrise, then the exponential advancement of the setting that occurred in 1987 was really the bone into orbit moment. Here, we had sourcebooks for each of the 5 major factions, the Mercenary's Handbook, the first novel dealing with the political factions of the Inner Sphere. BattleTech's first novel itself, Decision at Thunder Rift, was limited to a single world and the initial foundational exploits of a single mercenary unit, and the first detailed map of the Inner Sphere itself. The Succession Wars, a large-scale board wargame, came out this year, and now we could see this space opera setting in all of its technicolor detail. Okay, so initially I was drawn to Blue, the Lyran Commonwealth, both because the Grey Death Legion had affiliation to it, and I loved the Decision at Thunder Rift novel. And, well, it was Blue. Of course, now I'm thoroughly red and dedicated to the Dragon of the Combine, but, well, you know, the naivety of youth and all that. More novels, more sourcebooks, more details, more sourcebooks detailing events in novels, more delving into the past history of the setting. All of this came from 1988 on. As the years went by, the setting became more detailed, but was generally all focused around a single year. While the novels danced around that year, both before and after, the foundation of the game provided 3025 as an anchor point. In fact, an anchor point that still exists today for the various starter sets produced for BattleTech. But change was coming. 1989 set the stage for a quantum leap from that 3025 bench, with the release of the Wolf's Dragoon sourcebook, the 2750 technical readout, and the 20-year update. And then, bam, 1990, the clans were here. With technical readout 3050 and the Battle of Twycross, these high-tech invaders from the Inner Sphere's past carved a sway through the Inner Sphere, and, from that point on, the entire setting felt more dynamic, and less like a static backdrop for a fun board wargame. From 1989 on, the timeline of the setting has been continually pushed, with, give or take a few blips here and there, a stream of sourcebooks updating the state of play following major and minor conflicts. Battles between the clans, battles between the Inner Sphere and the clans, battles between factions within the Inner Sphere itself, each war building somehow on the last. Tamar's words, writ large, as few corners of the Inner Sphere could be said to have entirely avoided war for the timeline's current span of over 120 years in direct, gamed-out background. From the Third Succession War of 3025 through to the current Ilkhanate of 3152, the Inner Sphere has seen an ever-shifting set of borders as factions have waxed and waned, appeared and been eliminated. Dynasties have arisen and been toppled in ways a Game of Thrones could only dream about. In many ways, the setting has outgrown the game. And while it is still a lot of fun to move stompy robots around, firing missiles and particle projection cannons at your enemy, this is perhaps almost the least component of the franchise the Inner Sphere spawned. With novels and some very popular video games, and despite a current renaissance of sorts with the board wargame itself, the latter often feels like the nostalgic component as veteran mech warriors, not droid warriors, tell the new kids on the block, while we secretly bask in the glory that the setting itself, the battle-torn and scarred expanse of the Inner Sphere, is still there, and still a testament to Tamar's old future writings. We can look at it as a science fiction setting that is only 7 years younger than Star Wars, yet almost equally as detailed, certainly more so, in a contiguous timeline manner, and still repeat those words that we spoke in our youth. What? No movie? The Inner Sphere is heavily biased towards supporting gaming, which is pretty good for a setting created to support a game. In the beginning, there were 5 main factions: Davian, Kurita, Steiner, Lau, and Marek, along with a number of mercenary units and periphery factions that initially served as roll-to-your-own-taste examples. The factions were distinctly identifiable in one way or another. Davian with a somewhat Arthurian complex, Kurita with its space samurai and mech shtick, Steiner with its Germanic overtones and a sort of Celtic fringe feel within certain portions of it. Lau as Fu Manchu pastiche bad guys, which fortunately is something that they have outgrown, and Marek as the chaotic federation of smaller states that, to me at least, feels something like the relationship between the United States federal and state governments. Added to this mix over the course of the game's background development are the high-tech quasi-religious faction of Comstar and its fanatic terrorist offshoot, the Word of Blake, plus the Nordic Free Rasselhague Republic, a state formed in 3034 as an independent buffer between the Draconis Combine of House Kurita and the Lyran Commonwealth of House Steiner. The arrival of the clans added more advanced high-tech options to the game, essentially providing 3 tiers of play: 3025 limited technology Inner Sphere, an Inner Sphere with the reintroduction of some lost elements of technology from the Star League era, and the result of further development of Star League tech in the advanced weaponry fielded by the clans. Not only that, but the clans introduced further factions with their own distinct personalities: the sharp, belligerent Jade Falcons, the generally belligerent Smoke Jaguars, the more strategically thoughtful Wolves, the Juggernaut Ghost Bears, the spiritual Nova Cats, the angry but pathetic Steel Vipers, and the opportunistic Diamond Sharks. Other clans are available, but initially most of those stayed at home. This provides players of the board, video or role-playing games, or those who are just simply fans of the novels, with a lot of options to hook into. Which faction speaks more to an individual BattleTech fan speaks a lot about their own interests, tastes and style of play. I do like samurai movies, and that concept of an army fighting as individuals yet as part of a whole appeals to me. So, naturally, here I am with a developed mercenary battalion solidly aligned to the Draconis Combine. The setting's developers have also done a really, really good job with the iconography. Show a BattleTech player a colour, and they will be able to identify a faction from it. And, for the most part, The faction logos are amongst the best designs across the hobbies through which the BattleTech franchise weaves. Over the years, it has also developed into a playing field with a massive scope of choice. Want a basic game with a handful of weapons and mech designs? 3025. Into asymmetrical wargaming? 3050. Up for a bit of brother-on-sister civil warring with similar units and a whole heap of chaotic grudge? 3067. Cyborg quasi-religious fanatics? Well, check out the Mani Domine of the Word of Blake. Confused collapse, where small units fight with anything that they can get their hands on, including mecha equivalents of tractors and hedge trimmers. The Dark Ages of the 3130s. Technological diversity with clans and Innisphere almost on parity, but on a very divergent track, 3150s. Those 120 plus and counting years of source material present someone interested in giant robots kicking the snot out of each other with so many options in faction, in unit, in the backdrop for their gaming. Absolutely, on so many levels. If you enjoy science fiction space opera with a lot of pew-pewing and a seasoning of political intrigue, the novels are absolutely for you. If you enjoy mecha, then BattleTech offers so much more than the often very similar franchises of Robotech and various Japanese mangas that inspired both BattleTech and Robotech. If you like dodgy 1980s cartoons, well, BattleTech has one of those, except it forgot the time and put it out in the 1990s instead. If you like board war games with a fair amount of detail, then BattleTech is for you. And if you prefer faster playing games with less detail, then there's an alternative for you in Alpha Strike. If you like first-person shoot-'em-up video games, there's MechWarrior. And if you prefer more strategy, then there is the BattleTech video game. There are just so many aspects to the BattleTech universe that at least parts of it should appeal to any fan of science fiction. Just no movie yet. Well, come on, for grief's sake. Even World of Warcraft got one.